Hey there, this video is going to be a hands-on CLI demo of FluxCD. If you don't know, FluxCD was the first GitOps product pretty much. If you don't know what GitOps is, it's where the repo is the single source of truth for your Kubernetes state. So in there you will have all your manifests, your YAML files containing all the Kubernetes resources. Now, FluxCD is a graduated CNCF product. You may also, by the way, know about Argo CD. That's the other one. Now, to compare the two, there's basically only two GitOps products, really. FluxCD is CLI based. There are UIs available for it, but fundamentally it's CLI based. It's very light. It's not like Argo CD is more heavily UI based and also can be used for multiple clusters better, but it tends to be more heavy on resources. In this demo, I'm not going to cover something called Flagger. This is equivalent to Argo CD rollouts, so I won't be covering the deployment side in terms of blue, green, canary, and all that stuff. I'm going to show you the basic product. If you've not used FluxCD before, maybe you've never even had any exposure to GitOps, you'll be able to at least talk about it in an interview or to a colleague or whatever it is. This here, what we're looking at, is the way of proceedings today. So the yellow I'm going to assume you've already done, which is to install the Flux CLI. I'm not going to show you that because it depends on whether you're running Linux, Windows, Mac OS. Just go to the website at fluxcd.io. I'm also not going to cover making a repo. I've created one already, which I'll show you. I've called it fleet-infra. You actually, if you're following the Get Started guide, you don't even need to create a repo. It can just create that repo for you. I don't really like that. I'd rather create the repo myself. By the way, you get all the instructions here at fluxcd.io/flux/get-started. And also for my generic Git server installation, Bootstrap, I've used this. But they do have specific installs for popular CI/CD such as GitHub, GitLab, etc., etc. Today in the demo, I'm going to show you these three green blocks. These are the 1, 2, 3 different steps. And I want to show you this beforehand because if I just go straight into it, you're not going to know kind of what we're doing as we're going along. This is really going to help you. 3 stages. First, we're going to bootstrap Flux. Okay, this is where we run a command and we install Flux to the Kubernetes cluster and we connect it to the tracking repo, because ultimately, remember, that is GitOps. It's where we're connecting to the single source of truth. Flux calls that the tracking repo. Then we're going to do 2 other things. First, we're going to do is we're going to use a Flux create command, create source command. Now, what is a source? A source is where you're referencing the app repo. So Flux create source will reference the app repo. Well, actually, to do that, we're actually going to create a YAML, a manifest, and we'll push that as well. And then the second part of that is we're going to create a customization. You may already be familiar with customizations and Kustomize, but this is basically where we're going to represent the app in terms of Kubernetes resources, but they'll be referenced by a central index, if you like, called a customization. And again, we're going to use Flux create customization. So we're going to have a command that helps us create this YAML, and we'll push this. There are some alternatives to all of this, by the way, which I won't be covering, but it's important that you know. When we bootstrap, when we install Flux to the cluster, all the controllers that are part of Flux, and we connect it to the tracking repo, you can actually do this another way. You can just do Flux install, and it will install all the controllers and the associated Kubernetes resources to the cluster, or you can do a k-apply tac-f, and there's a YAML file which contains all the different resources. But if you do it this way, there will be no tracking repo, just to let you know. It'll just install to the cluster, but it won't be using a tracking repo as a single source of truth. Now, in terms of the source and the customization, that we're going to use Flux CLI to create the YAMLs and then push them, you can, of course, just manually create those by hand in both cases and push those to the repo. It's up to you, but the Flux CLI happens to be a very handy tool that you can use it to create these. I mean, long term, when you're doing things at scale, you may hardly ever use the CLI to create these, and you'll sort of manually create them or adapt them from existing ones, let's say. So, without further ado, let's head over to the terminal. So here we are in our trusty terminal. I'm in Linux, and one thing you should do first of all is do the kind of requirements or pre-flight check, or whatever you call it. This is the command, checking prerequisites. and as you can see it's passed. Basically your cluster shouldn't be too far out of version. And nothing huge to show you here. I just wanted to show you I'd created that repo called fleet-infra. You can call it what you want, but this is the suggestion. So that's what I created. There's nothing in here except for a README. Now Flux supports a variety of authentication methods. I've chosen to use a token, but you can use SSH or other methods as well. One other thing to say, in case it wasn't obvious, this is a private repo. You don't have to use a public repo. I've used a private one. It's perfectly acceptable. So next step before you do anything else is to clone the repo. I've already cloned it. You can see there it's in Fleet Infra, so cd into the directory. And now here's my command to do the bootstrapping. So it's flux bootstrap git, because I'm doing a generic git repo. But if you're using like GitHub or something like that, the command will be flux bootstrap github. It's all in the docs. It's super easy. Here's the URL. You can see it's in, you saw that before, I just showed it to you. Username, the password, I've already expressed this as an environment variable, that's why I'm referencing it like that. And this is just the path in the repo that you want to use, so I might as well use the default cluster as my cluster. So let's execute this. Okay, so what I did there was I wanted to let that just run in real time to give you an idea, but at the very end when it was doing the reconciliation thing and waiting for the pods to be ready and all that kind of stuff, at that point it was taking a little bit longer. I paused the video, it took about another 30 seconds. So here we are, it's complete, everything looks good. If you want to have a read of this, just pause the video now and have a read, because I'm going to move on now. So I just want to show you that the repo is also updated as part of that bootstrapping, and basically added this folder here, clusters my cluster flux system, and in here are customization file which refers to these these two YAML files here, and in there are all the components. There's all kinds of things, cluster role bindings and all sorts of bits and pieces. So one of the first things that we should do, because obviously we're going to be performing pushes later, we need to do a git pull now, this repo. And I've just done that quickly here, git pull, and you can see here that it pulled down those 3 files that we were looking at indeed. Now these files, you know, consider them system components. We don't really need to look at them in any great detail. Maybe you might want to tweak something later on, but for now we're okay. We're going to leave those. What we can do to illustrate, I've done a K, that's for kubectl, my alias, K get all in the namespace flux system, and let's have a look. So you can see here there's a whole bunch of stuff here. And one of the clues with this is that it supports very well, very natively, both Helm and Kustomize. So that's a clue as to how we're going to support our applications with this. But yeah, there's all kinds of things in here. Pods representing various controllers, various services, deployments, replica sets, etc. And now let's have a look. If I do a kget crd, then we can see it's also installed a whole bunch of CRDs. And again, you get an idea here because you see a lot of Helm, you see Git repos. It does some kind of support for buckets as well, customizations, etc. Now remember, we're going to create a source that connects to a repo and a customization that connects to a customized folder inside that repo. So one of the commands you can run is flux get sources all. This is super useful, and you can see here that by default there's actually a source already set up for the system itself. And we saw that earlier when we saw that Kustomize file and the 2 YAML files that are referencing that Kustomize. So already there is one source. And there I just ran also flux get customizations, and you can see, just as I mentioned as well, that customization within that repo, that there is even one for Flux system, and it's referenced here as a customization. And you can see here, in both cases it references the commit ID as well on the branch. Now I just want to show you as well that there is shorthand, because customizations is a bit of a mouthful and easy to misspell, so you can just say KS like that and it returned the same thing. Now something that you might not realize is that this is a Kubernetes resource. So if I go like this, I can also do a kget KS, but I have to type in all namespaces. So the cool thing about FluxGet KS is you don't have to say which namespace it applies to. I guess it just grabs everything. Obviously with Kubernetes, unless it's in the default namespace, you've got to either say all namespaces or specify the namespace. And look at the differences. There is a slight difference here. So if you look at the columns and whatever, then it's slightly different. This has a suspended status and also a revision. although it's actually it's coming from a larger field as well. But yeah, Flux kind of works a little bit similar. There's some analogy here to the kubectl command. So that's pretty cool. So what we need to do next is add a new source, add a new repo in addition to the Flux system one here. Let's have a quick look at the repo first. So for this demo, I've actually followed the suggestion that's in the Getting Started guide from FluxCD.io website, and it's to install this app, and it's called the PodInfo app. It's quite popular. It just gives some basic pod info. The key directory we want to look at here, I have a preview, is this one here, Kustomize directory. And what you have here is you've got three different manifests: deployment, service, and HPA, horizontal pod autoscaling. And they're all bound in a customization YAML. In case you've never seen the customization file, it just looks like this. It's just a root file to say, come here and I'll tell you where all the app files are stored, and it makes reference to other to the other dependencies. You can do more fancy stuff in here as well, but at its basic form, it's just a list of files. So now we're going to run this command, and what it's going to do is Flux create source is going to create this manifest called podinfo-source, and inside here is going to be information relating to the application we just looked at, that repo. This is the URL to that repo, and we want to make sure that we're on the master branch, and also that there will be this interval of 1 minute. So let's go ahead and do this. And there wasn't really any output or anything, so I'm going to run git status, and you can see here that there is a new file here. So I've just copied that path, and let's open it up in Vim and take a look. And you can see here we've got a manifest with a single Kubernetes resource. The API version comes from, you can see, FluxCD.io. So obviously this and the kind Git repository, it came from the CRDs that were installed as part of that bootstrapping. This new resource is going to have a name, podinfo. It's going to be in the namespace, Flux system, and it's going to refer to this repo on the master branch. And as I said, the interval is 1 minute, so that means it should be checking this every minute. And to be honest, in terms of checking, I don't know exactly what it's doing. Like, maybe it's just looking for the presence of it, and if it goes down, then maybe it'll raise an error or something like that. Not 100% sure, but obviously it's doing some kind of constant validation, which is a good thing. So we've just checked that file to see what's in it. Let's stage the file, let's commit it, let's push it to the repo. So git add tag a, git commit, add repo for podinfo. There we go. Let's just push that now. Now some magic should be happening, because obviously those controllers is always looking at that repo anyway. So let's just quickly do this. Flux get sources all, and nothing happened yet, but keep watching. I'm just going to keep pressing this. We should see some magic start to happen. And there we go, the magic started to happen. We've got this pod info now. It says unknown, processing object new generation, and then it says ready true. And I think that's all that happens. I don't think it changes anymore, if I remember correctly. Yeah, I forgot the command to do watch. I wasn't there in time, but it doesn't matter. Look, the main thing is we now got this additional source called podinfo, and this is the reference to the application repo, not my repo, but the other guy who wrote podinfo. And yeah, it's now registered as a source. So that's awesome. That's exactly what we wanted. I've just cleared the screen as well. So if we do a flux get ks, then for now we still only have the original Flux system for our own bootstrapping, our own controllers. This is the only customization we have. We don't yet have the one for podinfo because we've only added that repo as a source, but we haven't made reference to the customization directory sitting in that repo yet. That's what we need to do. That's what we're going to do next. Just in case you're in any doubt, what we've done is we've done the bootstrap. We've just done now created the source and pushed it, and that's all synced. Everything looks good. We're now on to part 3, the final part. We're going to create the customization referencing the app customization file for podinfo app. So here's the command. Let's run through it. Flux create customization, and this is going to create in the end a Kubernetes YAML, a manifest that's going to contain inside it one or more Kubernetes resources with these sort of specs. I'll run through the specs when we look at the file. Let's just run this first. And there we go, no output, but hey, just like before. Just to confirm, like before, I'll do a git status, and you can see that one file has changed. Let's open this up in Vim. So here we are in the manifest, and similar to before, we're looking at one Kubernetes resource. It's a new custom resource because you can see the API is customized, blah, blah, blah. It's a kind customization. And by the way, this is different. You might have seen other customization before. It won't have been from this API with FluxCD. So that's something interesting. And here's a metadata. It's also called pod info. It's a namespace Flux system. And in the spec we've got here an interval of 30 minutes. Now I don't know if this is quite wide to check for changes. I would have thought it might be less than this. Maybe you know the answer. Leave me a comment. I'm kind of curious about that. But anyway, in the repo it makes reference to that customized directory that we saw, and it's also got some other info. It has a reference to the source that we've already created and pushed. Remember, that was a kind Git repository. It also had the name pod info. It's got target namespace, etc., etc. So again, similar to last time, we're going to stage the file, we're going to commit it, we're going to push it to the remote repo, at which point the magic should start happening, right? Because there's the Flux controller is there. It will see that there's a change in the repo, and it will attempt to do something, and we're going to do a command then to watch the customization resources on the cluster itself. So let me just do this, and there we go, and let me do a push. Okay, all good. Let me clear the screen and let's do a flux get ks, and this time I am going to use this. So you can see already that's the existing customization, but we'll keep watching because things are going to start happening now. And there we go. It took about 20-30 seconds. Here we go. Things are happening now. And don't get confused. There are two different things. There are two different customizations here that are actually changing. So Flux system is finished now. The one we want to look at is pod info, which is still in reconciliation mode. And there we go. I think this is finished now. It has done what it's termed applied revision, and looks good to me, I think. Let's get a normal view of this without watching it. So let me do a flux get ks again. And there we go. You can see that they're both in a state of ready is true. And yeah, it looks good to me. Another very handy command is flux logs. This is useful, especially if you're waiting for syncing and maybe it hasn't gone properly and you're wondering why. Then have a look at this. And it's pretty cool. It's pretty useful, I think. And let's just run this command to see what has actually been created in terms of the application. So I'm running a kubectl in the namespace default and get deployments, services, and horizontal pod autoscalers. And there we go. You can see everything. You know, they're not all pod info. Like for example, this is just built into Kubernetes, obviously. But the three that we want are that one, and that one. And you can see the services exposed on a couple of ports. So let's do a port forward, shall we? So you're probably familiar with this command already. kubectl, namespace, port forward, service pod info, etc. And I'm just putting the ampersand because I'm going to send this to the background so that I can just break out of it, and now I can just do a curl localhost 8081. And you can see it's working because this is what the app actually does. It just returns some kind of general info. And in case you don't know, that this job that I've just created in the background, I'm going to send it back to the foreground and cancel it. So if I show you BG, you can see it already says there's already one in the background. So I'm going to say foreground 1 and then Control C out of it, and it's now stopped. So we completed steps 1, 2, and 3. And I've kind of realized that something I wasn't clear about was that this does support customization, and it also supports Helm. There is a big debate on one versus the other. Sometimes you don't have much choice, especially if you're reliant on a Helm package. But anyway, it supports both of those. With this demo, I've decided to show you with customization. I could easily have showed you with Helm, just so you know. But anyway, that's what we've done, 1, 2, and 3. Now let me show you some cleanup steps. I think the cleanup is important to some, although I'm running this on a kind of disposable cluster that I couldn't care less about. Some of you may be running it on a cluster at work or personal that you can't just delete when you're done, so you need to know the steps. So the best thing to do is to perform them in reverse. We actually learn a lot about how this product works. So the first thing I've done here is flux get customizations. We can see the pod info in addition to the original one that's in Flux system. So I'm going to do this command, flux delete customization pod info. Let's have a look. He said, are you sure you want to delete this customization? I'm going to say yes. Customization deleted. Now that's actually been deleted. Now what you might think is, wait a minute, we've got GitOps working here, we still have the source registered, is this not just going to come back? And the answer is that the way the behavior of this works is this customization will not come back. In fact, I haven't figured out a way of actually forcing it to come back. It's a little bit weird like that. It might be better to delete it off the repo and then let it delete itself, something like that instead. But anyway, you can issue this flux delete customization command and it will remove it and it won't come back. Now the next step is to delete the source, but let's have a look and remind ourselves. I've just done a flux get sources all. We can see here pod info source is there. So let's do this command, flux delete source git pod info. Are you sure you want to delete this source git? Yeah, it calls it a source git. You always have to say what kind of source it is because there's buckets and other types of source. Are you sure? Yes, we're sure. Why? There we go. It's deleted it apparently. So let's run this command, flux get sources all. And there you go. It's deleted it. We're only left with flux system. I've just cleared the screen to make it a bit easier to read. But yeah, as you can see, we've only got flux system here. I'm going to come back. I'm going to pause the video and come back because I'm telling you, the source is going to come back. Believe it when you see it. Hey, well, I'm back after about 5 minutes, and I almost thought it wasn't going to happen, but remember we deleted the customization pod info, we deleted the source pod info, we were only left with flux system. I ran this command again after waiting around 10 minutes, and what do you know? It synced again with the upstream repo, and it recreated the pod info source. So, even though I've deleted it, obviously it's still there in the repo, it will still resync, it will still bring it down. Now look at this. If I do a flux get ks, then you can see as well, it's actually pulled down the customization again. So remember I deleted this using Flux itself, Flux delete ks, and it couldn't come back. No matter what I did, I wasn't able to get it back. But then I deleted the source. The source then reappeared, and when the source reappeared, so did this customization for pod info as well. So quite interesting the way that it works. Also, if we look at Flux logs, then you'll be able to see when this happened. I think if I recognize it correctly, it looks like it was on this particular line of the log that it changed. It said stored artifact for commit, and here's the reference to the pod info app. And I don't know what's been truncated here, if it did that intentionally or whatever, but this appears to be where it resynced everything. But anyway, I just wanted to leave you with this. There is an elegant way to actually uninstall it, and that is to type in flux uninstall. And this is better than just deleting the namespace flux dash whatever, because that won't get rid of the CRDs. It might leave some other resources as well. Best to use this. Let's have a look. It's pretty quick. Are you sure you want to delete flux and its CRDs? Yes. And you can see exactly what it's doing. All those different resources getting rid of, including all the CRDs as well. You don't need a special command to delete these like you do in many other applications. And that's it. It's now finished. And if I do like a k get pod a and have a look here, and you can see there's no more flux namespace. You do see, however, the app left over. I find that quite interesting as well. So it didn't at the time decide to do a customized delete or anything like that for the app. It'll leave any apps remaining. So you may want to remove those manually by taking it out of the repo first and let it resync, or just running a customized delete command right at the end, whichever you prefer. One way or the other, you know that when you run the uninstall, it will get rid of Flux, but it won't get rid of any apps that you created with Flux. I mean, just for the sake of completeness, I happen to know the command that will just get rid of this, so I'm just going to run this kubectl delete tac k and then the link to the customized directory, and it should get rid of it. There we go. If I do a k get pods a, then you can see it's terminating. If I run it again, it's gone, and there we go. So that's it, a whirlwind demo of FluxCD. Really, plenty to talk about it with anyone in the industry. If you were to talk with someone and they wanted to know about GitOps and in particular FluxCD, a lot of people these days have used Argo CD but haven't used Flux. And Flux is still like the OG. It is a really, really good tool. As I said, it's light, it's CLI based, can be used even on like air-gapped environments. It's good because it's light. I've seen it being used, for example, in ephemeral kind of clusters as well. So I think it's cool. You don't need Argo CD. You don't need that over reliance on that UI and the browser freezing and all that kind of stuff. I'm going to actually go back to Flux and start using it a lot more and see if it, see if what people have been saying about it, that it's a really cool tool. See if that still definitely is the case. I think it is so far from what I've seen. So hope you really enjoyed this, and if you did, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. I will see you again soon. Take care. Bye bye.